I had exactly $68,412 left in the account the morning my son called and said, "Dad, why did you freeze it? Mara can't pay the contractor, and she's losing her mind." I was standing barefoot in my kitchen in Savannah, Georgia, holding a coffee mug I had already reheated once because grief does that to your sense of time. My wife had been gone 11 months. Some mornings still felt like I was living inside a room that had not yet accepted the fact that she wasn't coming back. On the table beside me was a small gray USB drive, a legal pad with my handwriting all over it, and a manila folder thick enough to change the shape of the morning. I had not slept much. At my age, lack of sleep doesn't make you dramatic. It just makes you quieter. I said, "Good morning, Evan." He didn't answer that part. He said, "I'm serious. She tried to send the deposit yesterday. It got blocked. What is going on?" I looked through the window over the sink at the magnolia tree my wife had insisted on planting, even though I told her the roots would get into everything. She told me good things usually do. I set the mug down carefully and said, "You and Mara come over. 9 o'clock. I'm making breakfast." "Dad, this isn't about breakfast." "It is now," I said, and ended the call. At 8:12, my attorney texted me one sentence. "If you miss this, you lose everything." He did not mean the money alone. He meant the record, the timing, the leverage that only exists for a brief moment before a liar realizes the room has changed and starts destroying the shape of the truth. That sentence sat on my screen like a nail. Let me take you back. 14 months earlier, my son had come to me with that careful tone grown children use when they are trying to be adults and still need help. He and his wife had found a house in Isle of Hope. Good street, good school district, roof less than 10 years old, flood history manageable. I know those things because I spent 38 years as a marine surveyor and property risk consultant, which is a boring way of saying I made a living spotting expensive problems before other people saw them. It made me useful. It also made me harder to fool than most. They were short $47,600 on the close. Evan did most of the talking. Mara sat beside him, one hand on his forearm, nodding at the right places. They had some savings, he said. They had been disciplined. Interest rates were shifting. Timing mattered. They just needed a bridge. I told them I could help, but only as a loan. I was retired, not wealthy. My house was paid off, my pension was steady, and my savings represented a lifetime of early alarms, long drives, hurricane inspections, and saying no when no was the responsible answer. I did not hand over money because someone wanted something. I handed it over when there was structure. Evan surprised me by agreeing immediately. "I want structure too," he said. "I don't want this to get vague." That mattered to me. We sat at this same kitchen table, and he suggested a simple arrangement. I would fund the shortfall. He would repay me at $600 a month, no interest. To keep everything transparent, we would use a linked savings account under both our names. He would deposit the repayment there every month. No withdrawals without both of us approving it. Clean, visible, documented. Mara smiled and said, "Honestly, that's probably better for everyone. Families get weird with money." I remember that line because it was one of the first true things she ever said in my presence. I transferred the funds the following week. They closed on the house. We had dinner there 2 Sundays later. Mara served roasted chicken and a lemon tart that was slightly underbaked in the center, and my late wife would have liked her for trying. The kitchen still smelled like fresh paint and cardboard and new beginnings. Evan walked me through the backyard plans. He was tired but excited. He looked like a man building a life. At the time, I thought that was what was happening. There were warning signs before the money. Most people miss those because they don't look like danger when they first arrive. They look like personality. The first incident was at Thanksgiving 3 years earlier, before the marriage, at my sister Ruth's house in Bluffton. Ruth has always had a soft spot for Evan, the only grandson, the family future, the one who could do no wrong because he happened to be born charming. My daughter Leah, who is older than Evan by 4 years and works twice as hard for half the praise, showed up late because the hospital had called her in. She still brought 2 pies. She still set the table without being asked. Mara, who was still just Evan's girlfriend then, watched the whole thing and laughed when Ruth said, "Leah always loved being useful." Leah smiled the way women smile when they have spent their entire lives swallowing small insults in the name of peace. Mara leaned toward Evan and said, not quite softly enough, "Some families pick a hero and an errand girl and never update the system. It was a cruel thing dressed as an observation. Evan laughed. Leah pretended she had not heard it. I did hear it, and I also heard the pleasure Mara took in saying it. She liked identifying fault lines in a room. She liked putting her fingertip into them and feeling them widen. The second incident came the year after my wife, Helen, died. I was numb in the practical ways grief makes a person numb. I answered calls. I signed papers. I thanked people for casseroles. I forgot where I left my glasses 3 times a day. At the memorial reception, which we held in a private room at the Davenport House Garden Museum because Helen loved old places that kept standing, Mara found me alone near the coffee urn and said, "You need to think about simplifying your estate while you're still clear-headed." Those were her words. While you're still clear-headed. I looked at her for a long second and said, "My estate is in order." She smiled. "Of course. I just mean these things get complicated when men are alone. Men are alone. Not people grieve. Not you must miss her. Men are alone. That is the tone you learn to remember. Calm cruelty. Casual dehumanization. The kind that leaves no bruise and still tells you exactly who is standing in front of you. I should have paid more attention then. That is my flaw in stories like this. I mistake restraint for wisdom even after restraint stops serving the truth. I let too many things wait because I prefer peace, and by the time I act, the other person has often mistaken my patience for blindness. The account stayed orderly for the first 4 months. Evan deposited 2 payments on time, one a few days late, one early. Then life, as it does, started getting noisier. He took on more work. The house needed a drainage fix after a hard spring rain. Helen's death turned my days into a strange routine of quiet mornings and too long afternoons. I checked the account less often than I should have. The first thing that caught my attention was not a missing payment. It was a withdrawal. $680. Tuesday, 1:14 p.m. I knew Evan would be at work. He managed operations for a commercial HVAC firm across town and kept the kind of hours that make your neck hurt just looking at them. I sat back in my study chair and looked at the line item for a long time, waiting for it to explain itself. It did not. I called him that evening. He sounded tired but normal. I asked how work was. I asked how the foundation repair had gone. Then I asked whether he had taken money from the repayment account for some house expense we had discussed, and I had forgotten. He said, "No, I haven't touched it." There are moments when you hear a lie, and there are moments when you hear the absence of knowledge. This was the second kind. He was not covering anything. He genuinely did not know what I was asking him. I said, "All right," and changed the subject. That night I logged in and went through every transaction for the previous 10 months. The deeper I went, the quieter I got. There were 19 withdrawals. Different amounts. $340, $780, $1,150, $495. All daytime. All weekdays. Total, $14,920. Repayment deposits had become sporadic, then symbolic, then almost irrelevant compared to what was leaving. The next morning, I went to the bank. A branch manager named Teresa, who had the efficient kindness of someone who has dealt with panic before breakfast, pulled up the access history after I explained that I was concerned about unauthorized use. She turned the monitor toward me. Evan had logged in 4 times in 10 months, always from his phone, always after 6 p.m. Every withdrawal had originated from a tablet device associated with the same residential IP address. The address traced to Evan's home internet service. "Can you tell whose tablet?" I asked. She said, "Not by name. Only device signature, timestamps, and origin." I wrote everything down anyway. From that point forward, I stopped being a father for an hour a day and became what I had always been professionally, a man building a record. I set transaction alerts at $50. I printed statements every Friday. I created a ledger with columns for date, time, amount, originating device, stated memo if any, and running total. I took screenshots of the login history and backed them up to the gray USB drive. Then I waited. 5 more withdrawals came over the next 7 weeks. The memos were almost insulting in their vagueness. Office expense, design hold, contract balance, vendor issue. None of it was tied to anything I had approved. None of it matched the purpose of the account. Meanwhile, other details around the edges of their life began to sharpen. Mara's home office suddenly contained custom-built tents. The powder room downstairs was temporarily being redone. A new outdoor furniture set appeared on the back patio, the kind made for magazines and people with more confidence than liquidity. When I asked Evan how things were going financially, he said, "Tight, but manageable." Then he changed the subject. What altered the whole shape of the situation was not the money itself. It was my son's face. One Sunday, he came over for breakfast alone because Mara had a client deadline. He looked exhausted in a way labor does not produce. Labor has weight in the shoulders and relief in the chair once you sit down. This was something else. His eyes kept drifting while I spoke. His jaw tightened at random moments. He asked whether variable rate home equity products were ever a good idea, then pretended it was just curiosity. I said, "Are you in trouble?" He said, "No, just trying to stay ahead of things." That was when I understood I was no longer dealing only with my own missing money. I was dealing with a system inside my son's life that he did not fully see. The second folder changed everything. The first folder was bank records, access logs, and account terms. The second began with a name I had not expected, Denise Calloway. Denise was, according to a friend of a friend, the former controller of a mid-sized property management firm in Charleston where Mara had worked before she met Evan. I did not contact Denise myself. I contacted my attorney, Samuel Reddick, because civilians with suspicions should not try to play detective in other people's employment histories. Sam had handled Helen's estate and one ugly contractor dispute for me years earlier. He believed in paper, sequence, and not showing your hand too early. That made him my kind of lawyer. I took him everything. He listened without interrupting, flipping pages, asking exact questions at exact moments. When he finished, he tapped the ledger once with his pen and said, "This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a pattern." Then, because good lawyers explain terms instead of using them like decorations, he walked me through what mattered. Unauthorized access, misappropriation, digital authorization trail, civil exposure, potential fraud carve-out if funds were obtained under false pretenses and diverted beyond the stated account purpose. He explained an affidavit. He explained subpoena standards. He explained why metadata matters when people think deleting a message deletes a history. Then he said the sentence that steadied me more than it should have. "This isn't revenge. This is justice." I nodded. He asked for permission to investigate quietly. What he found arrived in stages, and each stage made the previous one worse. Mara had not simply been sloppy at the old job. She had been terminated after an internal forensic audit flagged recurring expense reimbursements tied to duplicate invoice numbers and altered vendor records. The company had kept the matter private after repayment and separation, but the paper existed. A former board member had signed the settlement memo. That former board member, because the world is smaller than people think, now sat on the donor committee of the Coastal Preservation Gala where Evan and Mara were scheduled to attend in 6 weeks. Mara had talked for months about how important that event was for her freelance brand. She had recently begun presenting herself as an interior design consultant. The gala was her public step upward. That was uniqueness seed one, though I did not think of it that way then. A social circle she believed would validate her turned out to contain a witness from a life she thought had stayed buried. Uniqueness seed 2 was more technical. Sam's investigator obtained a chain of documents showing that several of the contractor payments from my account corresponded to invoices created on Mara's tablet and altered after export. The PDF metadata preserved author information she had forgotten existed. Same device family as the banking access. Same naming convention. Same timestamps clustered within minutes of the transfers. She was moving money and manufacturing reasons almost in real time. Uniqueness seed 3 sat in the loan agreement itself, though I did not know how valuable it was until Sam pointed it out. At his suggestion months earlier, when I updated my estate documents after Helen died, we had included a limited fraud carve-out in family loan schedules. If any borrower or affiliated party accessed a repayment vehicle without documented mutual authorization, the remaining loan balance became immediately callable and eligible for emergency protective relief. In plain English, if you stole through the repayment account, I could accelerate the debt and seek an asset freeze. I had signed that update half distracted in a season of paperwork. It saved me. I froze the account on a Thursday. I did it through the bank with the access documentation in front of me and Sam on standby. Then I asked the bank to preserve the digital log history pending possible legal action. Preservation matters. Timing matters. People think truth is about righteousness. Often it is just about whether the right records still exist when the room gets serious. The next step was breakfast. At 9:02 that Friday, Evan and Mara pulled into my driveway. I watched from the kitchen window. Evan looked like a man heading to a dental procedure he could not postpone. Mara stepped out first. Trim white blouse, camel slacks, sunglasses too large for the hour. The posture of someone expecting to correct a clerical inconvenience and recover her morning. I opened the door before they knocked. "Come in," I said. "Coffee's fresh." Mara gave me a tight smile. "I appreciate that, but I really need to get this account issue fixed quickly. The contractor is threatening to rebook our slot." "Sit down," I said. My son sat immediately. Mara hesitated, then sat when she saw something in Evan's face that told her this was not hers to pace. I served eggs, bacon, toast. Nobody touched much of it. I placed the manila folder in front of Evan. He said, "Dad, what is this?" "The reason the account is frozen," I said. "Read before anyone speaks." Mara reached for the folder. I rested my hand on it and said, "He reads first." The room went quiet in the way only kitchens can go quiet. Refrigerator hum, clock tick, spoon against ceramic somewhere in memory. Evan turned pages. I watched confusion become concentration, concentration become arithmetic, arithmetic become dread. When he reached the summary page with the total highlighted in red, his shoulders actually dropped, as if his body had recognized something before his mind fully did. He looked up once and asked, 14,920? Before the last 5 withdrawals, I said. Current total is $18,460 from that account alone. Mara said quickly, "Those were house expenses. We talked about using it flexibly." Evan did not look at her. He kept reading. I said, "Second section." He turned to the signed agreement. His own initials sat at the bottom of each page. "No withdrawals without documented mutual consent," he read quietly. Mara said, "That was before things changed." I said, "Show me where it changed." She opened her mouth and closed it. "Third section," I said. That was the employment history, the settlement memo, the comparison chart between invoice metadata and transfer times, the investigator's affidavit, and the legal note explaining the fraud carve-out. Evan read that section twice. Mara did not cry immediately. People who lie as practice usually begin with indignation, not tears. She said, "This is insane. You hired someone to dig into my past. I hired counsel to investigate unauthorized access to my money," I said. She turned to Evan. "Your father has never liked me." That was not true, which made it useful to her. False statements work best when they borrow the shape of a real insecurity. Evan looked at her then, really looked at her, and said, "Did you do this?" There was a pause long enough to end a marriage even before the answer came. She said, "I moved money around because we needed it, and I always intended to put it back." Intent is a flimsy shelter once documents arrive. Evan asked, "For my father's repayment account?" She said, "For the house. For us." He said, "Without telling me?" She answered too fast. "Because you would have overreacted." There it was. Not apology. Not confusion. Contempt. I saw the exact moment my son understood that the danger in a person is not always that they lie. Sometimes it is that they have built an internal court where they are always reasonable and everyone they deceive is merely inconvenient. He stood up and walked to the window. Mara tried the next strategy. "You're making this sound criminal." Sam had warned me about that line. People say it when they want you to retreat into family feelings and away from legal language. I said, "It is already criminal enough to require counsel." She stared at me. I added, "And if you think this is only about my account, you're mistaken." That got Evan's attention. He turned. I slid a second, thinner folder across the table. Joint credit applications. A home improvement card. An online line of credit. 2 balances I knew he had not mentioned because he did not know they existed. He looked at one page and went white. "What is this?" he asked. Mara said, "I was handling cash flow." "No," he said softly. "What is this?" The soft voice was worse than yelling. Soft voices mean the person has gone past the need to perform emotion for the room. We spent the next 90 minutes in a form of truth that is less like conversation and more like controlled demolition. Piece by piece, Evan asked. Piece by piece, the story shrank under evidence. Contractor deposits were inflated. One designer was fictitious. Several charges had funded travel, furniture, and image-building expenses tied to Mara's consulting persona. She had been trying to build a business and a life faster than their income allowed, and she had chosen other people's accounts as the bridge. At one point she said, "I did this for our future." Evan replied, "You did this to avoid hearing the word no." That was the smartest thing he said all day. Before they left, I walked him to the driveway alone. He leaned against the car and rubbed both hands over his face like he was trying to erase the last 2 years. "I should have seen it," he said. "You trusted your wife?" I said. "That's not stupidity." He laughed once without humor. "It feels close." "No," I said. "Stupidity is getting shown the truth and looking away." He nodded. I told him to pull every personal and joint account immediately, place fraud alerts, and let his attorney speak before he did. He hugged me before getting in the car, which he had not done unexpectedly since he was 17 and leaving for community college. When he drove off, Mara stared straight ahead and did not wave. I went inside, put the untouched bacon in the fridge, and called Sam. What followed was not quick. Anyone telling these stories as if truth detonates, and then life becomes neat, is either lying or writing fiction for weak audiences. First came the emergency filings. Sam used the fraud carve-out to accelerate the remaining loan balance and petition for a temporary asset restraint against funds traceable to the unauthorized transfers. Because the documentation was unusually clean, we got limited relief fast. Not everything. Enough. Enough to stop further flight. Then came subpoenas, bank records, device logs, invoice chains, email headers, metadata on PDF creation, an escrow inquiry tied to the supposed kitchen project. The kitchen contractor, once contacted formally, confirmed he had never received the full deposit Mara claimed to have sent and had not scheduled work beyond a preliminary consult. The urgency that prompted Evan's call that morning had been mostly theater. Then came the gala. I had not wanted to attend, but Sam encouraged it because Mara had spent months using that event as social capital, and social capital sometimes collapses faster in person than on paper. The gala was held at the Ships of the Sea Museum courtyard under rented lights and white linen. One of those southern evenings where everyone performs ease while calculating each other's usefulness. I went because a donor had invited me years earlier after I helped assess storm damage on a historic property. I wore the navy suit Helen bought me for Leah's wedding and still called my court suit, even though it predated any courtroom by a decade. Mara arrived on Evan's arm, though by then I knew they were barely speaking except through lawyers and logistics. She saw me near the silent auction display, and her expression flickered. Not fear. Not yet. Annoyance. Then Denise Calloway approached. Denise was smaller than I expected, silver-haired, posture like a ruler. She greeted me first because Sam had arranged an introduction. Then she turned to Mara and said, in the measured tone of someone who hates public scenes but hates manipulation more, "I didn't expect to see you here." Mara froze. Evan looked from one woman to the other. Denise did not expose details. Respectable people with old legal settlements rarely do. But she said enough. She said, "I hope you're not handling anyone's accounts anymore." That line landed harder than a speech would have. Mara said, "I think you're mistaken." Denise held her gaze and replied, "I'm not." Dramatic irony is a beautiful thing when the person smiling in a room is the only one who doesn't yet know that the room has started keeping score. That was the moment Evan's last private doubt died. I saw it. A week later, settlement discussions failed. Mara's counsel wanted confidentiality, no admission beyond financial misunderstanding, and a repayment schedule light enough to feel insulting. Evan refused. I was proud of him for that, though I did not say so then because pride is best shown by standing beside someone, not draping it over them. The civil case proceeded. The district attorney's office, presented with the digital trail and the prior employment pattern, filed charges related to unauthorized financial access, fraudulent use of funds, and identity-linked credit misuse. Not every ugly thing becomes a criminal case. This one did because the record was disciplined, the numbers were clear, and the conduct repeated. The courtroom went silent when the prosecutor displayed the metadata timeline on the monitor. There is something uniquely devastating about seeing a lie translated into timestamps. People can argue intentions. They can argue memory. They can argue tone. They cannot argue that a document was created on one device at 1:02 p.m., exported at 1:05, and followed by a bank transfer at 111 from the same device family. Sequence has a cruelty to it because it removes room for personality. Mara took a plea before trial. Terms: supervised probation, mandatory restitution, financial monitoring, community service, and a prohibition on fiduciary or account management roles during the supervision period. The civil side produced repayment terms, debt acknowledgement, and structured recovery of the diverted funds plus fees. She lost the consulting contracts she had tried so hard to posture into. Word does not need to spread loudly when the right people hear the right truth in the right order. Evan filed for divorce 3 months after breakfast. I did not tell him to. I did not tell him not to. When adult children suffer, the temptation to become the architect of their next life is strong and usually unhelpful. I answered questions when he asked them. I drove him to one attorney meeting because parking downtown is miserable. I helped him review sale disclosures when he decided to list the house. Beyond that, I let him be a man in pain instead of a boy needing instruction. He sold the place in late spring. The buyer cared less about the kitchen than Mara had. That felt fitting. Our Sundays changed after that. At first, he came over because he did not want to sit alone in the rental. Then he came over because routine is one of the few honest medicines for shame. We ate eggs. We watched the yard. We spoke about normal things until the normal things became real again. He looked terrible for a while. Then he looked merely tired. Then, slowly, he looked like himself, except older in the way truth ages a person and then sometimes returns them to their own life with better posture. Leah started joining us more often too. There was one Sunday when Evan apologized to her for years of letting little things slide in rooms where she was always expected to absorb them. She was quiet for a second, then said, "I know." That may have been the most merciful sentence I heard that year. 1 year later, the magnolia outside my kitchen window had grown dense enough to throw shade across half the back walk by noon. Evan had a smaller apartment, a cleaner credit report, and a calmer face. Restitution payments were arriving on schedule through channels managed by people who did not care about anyone's feelings. I trusted that arrangement immensely. He had also started seeing someone. He told me about her over Sunday breakfast, sitting at the same table where his marriage had effectively ended. Her name was Nora. She taught middle school science. She laughed with her whole face, he said, which is one of the few descriptions of affection I trust. He looked embarrassed telling me. Hope embarrasses people when they've recently been fooled by it. I said, "Bring her by when you're ready." He smiled, real and unguarded. "I will." After he left, I sat alone for a while with my coffee and the morning light and thought about how many disasters begin with a person ignoring the first quiet wrongness because they would rather preserve a relationship than disturb a pattern. I understand that impulse. I have lived it. I may even live some version of it again, because being human does not mean we outgrow denial. It means we get more familiar with the cost. So if there is a lesson in any of this, it is not that everyone around you is dangerous. Most people are not. It is not that family should be treated like suspects. They should not. It is not even that trust is foolish. Trust is one of the few things that makes life livable. The lesson is narrower and harder. When the numbers stop making sense, respect the discomfort. When explanations feel polished but never quite satisfying, do not argue first. Document first. When someone benefits from your confusion, clarity becomes a form of self-respect. And when the truth finally arrives, let it arrive all the way. Half-truth is just a longer road back to the same pain. I still have the gray USB drive in my desk drawer. I still have the folders. Not because I enjoy looking at them. I do not. But because there is peace in knowing that when my family stood on unstable ground, I did not answer chaos with chaos. I answered it with records, patience, counsel, and the willingness to let reality speak louder than anyone's performance. That is what saved the money. More importantly, it is what saved my son. If you've ever had that low, steady feeling that something in your life is being rearranged behind your back, what did you do first? Confront, investigate, or stay quiet too long? And if this kind of story speaks to you, subscribe.